The morning sun filtered through the heavy curtains of Clarence's house, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where Charles sat reviewing his daily schedule. At 74, the newly crowned king had developed routines that kept him grounded in an increasingly chaotic world. His morning tea, precisely at 7:30. The Times spread across his desk by 8. And, always, the comforting presence of Camilla somewhere nearby. This particular Tuesday felt different, though Charles couldn't pinpoint why. Perhaps it was the unusual silence that had settled over their normally bustling household, or maybe it was the way Camilla had hurried out earlier, claiming she had forgotten an important appointment. She had seemed agitated, distracted in a way that was unlike her usual composed demeanor. Charles adjusted his reading glasses and tried to focus on the documents before him. Trade agreements, diplomatic correspondence, and briefing notes about his upcoming state visit to Australia. The mundane business of monarchy that had consumed his life for decades. Yet his mind kept wandering to his wife's strange behavior over the past few weeks. Camilla had always been his anchor, the one person who understood the peculiar pressures of royal life without being intimidated by them. She possessed a natural warmth that had gradually won over even his harshest critics. Their love story, once scandalous, had evolved into something the British public had learned to accept and even admire. She was his queen consort, his partner in both duty and life. The sound of footsteps in the corridor broke his concentration. Charles looked up, expecting to see Camilla's familiar figure, but, instead, his private secretary appeared in the doorway. "Your Majesty, I'm afraid the Queen Consort has had to extend her appointment. She asked me to inform you that she'll be late for lunch." Charles nodded absently. Another appointment. Another mysterious absence. Over the past month, these unexplained departures had become increasingly frequent. When he asked about them, Camilla would offer vague explanations about charity work or old friends. Nothing specific enough to be concerning, yet nothing concrete enough to be entirely believable. He tried to push away the growing unease. Trust had been the foundation of their relationship. During those difficult years when their love affair was front-page news, when every move was scrutinized and every gesture analyzed, they had relied on absolute honesty with each other. It was what had sustained them through the storms of public disapproval and private heartache. The afternoon stretched endlessly. Charles attended a meeting with his environmental advisors, reviewed plans for sustainable farming initiatives, and signed correspondence that would be sent to various Commonwealth leaders. Yet throughout each task, his thoughts returned to Camilla's increasing absence from their shared routines. By evening, when she finally returned to Clarence's house, Charles was waiting in their private sitting room. Camilla entered with her usual smile, but he noticed the slight tightness around her eyes, the way her hands moved restlessly as she set down her handbag. "How was your day, darling?" she asked, moving to pour herself a glass of wine from the crystal decanter on the side table. "Productive," Charles replied, studying her carefully. "Though I missed your company at lunch." "Yes, sorry about that." The appointment ran longer than expected. She settled into her favorite armchair, avoiding his direct gaze. "What sort of appointment was it?" There was the slightest pause before she answered. "Just some charity business. Nothing too interesting." Charles felt a familiar knot forming in his stomach. The same sensation he'd experienced years ago when he'd sensed something was wrong but couldn't quite identify what. He wanted to press further, to ask which charity, to understand why these appointments had become so frequent and so secretive. But something held him back. Perhaps it was decades of diplomatic training, or perhaps it was simple fear of what he might discover. They spent the evening in relative quiet, each absorbed in their own reading. Camilla seemed unusually engrossed in her book, though Charles noticed she hadn't turned a page in nearly 20 minutes. The comfortable silence that usually existed between them felt strained, filled with unspoken questions and careful avoidances. When they retired for the evening, Charles lay awake long after Camilla's breathing had settled into the rhythm of sleep. The moonlight streaming through their bedroom window illuminated her peaceful face, and he felt a surge of protective love for this woman who had stood by him through so much. Whatever was troubling her, whatever these mysterious appointments were about, surely there was an innocent explanation. Surely the trust they had built over decades was strong enough to weather any misunderstanding. The next morning brought unexpected chaos. Charles was scheduled to attend the opening of a new medical research facility, a commitment that had been in his diary for months. As his valet helped him into his formal attire, he heard unusual commotion from downstairs. Raised voices, hurried footsteps, the sound of car doors slamming. "What's happening down there?" he asked his valet, who had moved to the window to peer out. "It appears there's some sort of emergency, Your Majesty. Several cars have arrived, and I can see security personnel." Charles felt his pulse quicken. In their world, unexpected arrivals usually meant crisis. He quickly finished dressing and made his way downstairs, where he found his private secretary in intense conversation with the head of his security detail. "What's the situation?" Charles demanded. "Your Majesty, we've received intelligence about a potential security breach. Nothing immediately dangerous, but we need to implement additional protective measures for today's engagement." "What sort of breach?" "We're still gathering details, sir. It may be related to some communications that have been intercepted. Our technology team is investigating." Charles felt the familiar weight of royal responsibility settling on his shoulders. Security threats were an unfortunate reality of his position, but they never became routine. Each one required careful assessment, measured response, and absolute discretion. "Where's the Queen Consort?" he asked, suddenly, realizing he hadn't seen Camilla during the morning's turmoil. "She left very early, Your Majesty. Before the security team arrived. She mentioned something about an urgent appointment." Another appointment. Another unexplained absence at a moment when her presence would normally be expected. Charles tried to push down his growing concern, but the timing felt increasingly significant. The day's official engagement proceeded without incident, though Charles found it difficult to concentrate fully on the medical research presentations and ceremonial ribbon cutting. His mind kept returning to the mysterious security breach and Camilla's continued absence. By the time he returned to Clarence House that evening, he was determined to have an honest conversation with his wife about whatever was troubling her. But Camilla wasn't home. Her lady-in-waiting informed him that she had telephoned to say she would be staying overnight with a friend who was experiencing some sort of crisis. No details about which friend or what kind of crisis. No indication of when she would return. Charles spent the evening alone in their private sitting room, surrounded by the familiar comfort of leather-bound books and family photographs. Yet comfort felt elusive. The silence of the house seemed to echo with unasked questions and unspoken concerns. He found himself studying the framed photos of their life together, searching for clues he might have missed, signs of discontent or deception he should have noticed. Their wedding photo drew his attention. Camilla's radiant smile, his own expression of deep contentment. They had been so certain that their love could withstand anything, that their commitment to each other and to their royal duties would be enough to build a stable, honest partnership. Looking at that photo now, Charles wondered when things had begun to change, when the easy intimacy had been replaced by careful distances and diplomatic conversations. Sleep came fitfully that night. Charles found himself listening for the sound of Camilla's return, checking his phone for messages that never came. When morning arrived without word from his wife, he made a decision that would alter the course of their marriage forever. He would find out what was really happening. The opportunity came sooner than expected. As Charles was finishing his breakfast, his valet appeared with a concerned expression. "Your Majesty, there appears to be a mobile phone in the morning room. It seems to have been left behind by someone yesterday." Charles felt his pulse quicken. "Show me." The phone lay on a side table near the window, its screen dark but clearly expensive. As Charles picked it up, he recognized the distinctive case immediately. It was Camilla's phone, the one she had been using increasingly frequently during her mysterious appointments. He held the device in his hands, feeling its weight and considering his options. Privacy had always been sacred between them. During their courtship, when media intrusion was constant and trust was their only refuge, they had made explicit promises never to violate each other's personal boundaries. Looking through someone's phone was the kind of betrayal that destroyed relationships. But, standing alone in the morning room, holding evidence of his wife's secret communications, Charles felt the weight of weeks of unexplained absences and evasive answers. The security breach mentioned yesterday. The increasing distance between them. The subtle changes in Camilla's behavior that had been accumulating like storm clouds on the horizon. His finger moved almost involuntarily to the power button. The screen illuminated, displaying a series of notification previews that made his blood run cold. Messages from unknown numbers. Appointment reminders with coded references. And then, most shocking of all, a preview of a conversation that began with words that would haunt him forever. The discovery would change everything. But, in that moment, standing in the golden morning light of Clarence House, Charles couldn't yet imagine how completely his world was about to collapse. All he knew was that the phone in his hands contained secrets that his wife had been keeping from him. Secrets that might explain her recent behavior. Secrets that, once revealed, could never be unknown. With trembling fingers, he began to read. The first message hit Charles like a physical blow. It was from someone saved in Camilla's contacts simply as M, and the preview read, "The photos from last week are ready. Same location as before. Come alone." Charles stared at the screen, his mind racing to process what he was seeing. Photos? What photos? And why the instruction to come alone? His hands shook slightly as he scrolled to see more of the conversation thread. What he found made his stomach turn. M had been messaging Camilla for months. The earliest messages Charles could see dated back to March, just after his coronation. The conversations were cryptic, filled with references to meetings, packages, and something called the arrangement. Most disturbing were the increasingly urgent tones of recent messages. You need to be more careful. People are starting to notice. The situation is becoming complicated. We should consider accelerating the timeline. Your husband cannot find out about this. Everything depends on discretion. Charles sank into the nearest chair, his legs suddenly unable to support him. The formal language, the emphasis on secrecy, the reference to him as your husband rather than by name or title, it all pointed to something far more serious than a simple affair. This felt organized, calculated, deliberate. With growing dread, he opened another conversation thread. This one was with someone identified as legal counsel, and the messages were even more chilling. The documents need to be signed before any public announcement. Once the story breaks, there will be no going back. I understand the risks, Camilla had replied. But the alternative is worse. At least this way, I maintain some control. Control over what? Charles whispered to the empty room. He scrolled further, finding messages about bank accounts, property transfers, and media strategy. There were references to contingency plans and exit strategies that made his blood run cold. Whatever Camilla was involved in, it was complex, long-term, and potentially devastating. But it was the third conversation thread that destroyed him completely. This one was with someone listed as Andrew Parker, and, from the content, it was clear that this man knew intimate details about Charles's private life, his health, his relationships with his sons, even his personal insecurities. He still has no idea what's coming, one message from Camilla read. Sometimes I almost feel sorry for him. He trusts me completely. That trust is what makes this possible, Parker had responded. Sentiment is a luxury we can't afford now. Remember what's at stake. I know, Camilla had written back. It's just, after all these years together, it feels cruel. Cruelty is relative. He'll understand eventually why this was necessary. Charles read the exchange 3 times, each reading making the betrayal feel more complete and devastating. The woman he had loved for decades, the woman he had sacrificed his first marriage for, the woman he had made his queen, was discussing him like a mark in an elaborate con game. The phone buzzed in his hands with a new message from M, emergency meeting today. 3 p.m. Usual place. Come immediately after receiving this. Charles checked the time. It was nearly noon. Camilla would be expecting to attend this mysterious meeting in just a few hours. His mind raced through possibilities. He could confront her directly when she returned to collect her phone. He could have security investigate these contacts immediately. Or he could do something far more dangerous, he could follow her and discover exactly what kind of betrayal he was dealing with. The rational part of his mind insisted on caution. As king, he couldn't afford to make rash decisions based on incomplete information. But the husband in him, the man who had been lied to and manipulated for months, wanted answers immediately. He spent the next hour meticulously photographing every message thread on Camilla's phone, documenting the evidence of whatever conspiracy was unfolding around him. The conversations revealed a web of connections that extended far beyond his marriage. There were references to foreign contacts, media personalities, and even members of parliament. Whatever Camilla was involved in had tentacles reaching into the highest levels of British society. One conversation thread with a contact labeled financial advisor revealed the scope of the operation. The offshore accounts are ready. Once the announcement is made, the transfers can be completed within 24 hours.
How much? Camilla had asked. Enough to ensure complete independence.
You'll never need to worry about money again. The casualness with which they discussed vast sums of money being moved offshore made Charles realize this wasn't just betrayal, it was organized theft on a massive scale.
But, theft of what? Royal assets? State secrets? His personal fortune? Another thread provided disturbing context.
This one was with someone identified as journalist, Sunday Times. The exclusive is worth millions, but timing is everything. We need the story to break when maximum damage can be achieved.
I understand, Camilla had replied.
The revelations need to seem authentic, not coordinated.
The recordings will help with that. People believe what they hear more than what they read. Recordings. Charles felt sick. How long had Camilla been secretly recording their private conversations? What intimate moments had been captured and prepared for public consumption?
As the afternoon approached, Charles made his decision. He would not confront Camilla directly. Instead, he would have her followed to this mysterious meeting. He needed to understand the full scope of what he was facing before making any moves. As king, he had resources available that could investigate discreetly and thoroughly. He contacted his most trusted security advisor, a man who had served the royal family for over 20 years. Without revealing the personal nature of the situation, Charles requested immediate surveillance of his wife's activities. I need a complete report of where she goes, who she meets with, and what transpires, he instructed.
This is a matter of national security. It wasn't entirely a lie. If Camilla was involved in selling royal secrets or betraying state information, it absolutely was a matter of national security. The monarchy's reputation, built carefully over decades, could be destroyed by the wrong revelations at the wrong time.
While arrangements for surveillance were being made, Charles forced himself to maintain normal routines. He attended a scheduled video conference with Australian trade officials, signed correspondence, and reviewed briefing papers for upcoming diplomatic events. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying every conversation he'd had with Camilla over recent months, searching for clues he had missed.
Their last anniversary dinner stood out in his memory. Camilla had seemed distant, almost melancholy.
When he had asked if anything was wrong, she had smiled sadly and said, "Nothing that can be changed now." At the time, he had attributed her mood to the normal stresses of royal life. Now he wondered if she had been wrestling with guilt over the betrayal she was planning. The surveillance team reported back at 5 p.m.
Camilla had indeed attended a meeting at a private club in Mayfair.
She had been accompanied by 3 individuals, a man in his 50s who appeared to be the mysterious M, a woman who seemed to be taking notes throughout their conversation, and, surprisingly, a photographer who had been discreetly taking pictures of their interaction. The meeting lasted approximately 2 hours, the security chief reported. Our team was able to obtain some audio, though the quality is limited due to the distance required for discretion.
What did you hear?
References to timing, media coordination, and financial arrangements. The Queen Consort appeared to be receiving instructions rather than giving them.
She seemed reluctant about some aspect of their discussion. This information provided some relief.
If Camilla was being coerced or threatened, it would explain her behavior while offering hope that their marriage might be salvageable. But the conversations on her phone suggested a level of willing participation that couldn't be explained by simple intimidation. That evening, when Camilla returned to Clarence House, Charles watched her carefully. She seemed exhausted, older somehow than she had that morning. When she realized her phone was missing, panic flashed across her face before she quickly composed herself. "I seem to have misplaced my phone," she mentioned casually as they sat down for dinner.
"You haven't seen it anywhere, have you?"
"I believe one of the staff found a phone in the morning room," Charles replied, his voice remarkably steady considering the circumstances.
"It should be with security by now."
The color drained from Camilla's face.
"Security? Standard procedure for any unclaimed electronics in the residence. Security concerns, you understand."
Charles watched as his wife calculated the implications of her phone being in the hands of royal security. The device would be scanned for malicious software, and suspicious communications would certainly be flagged. She was intelligent enough to understand that her secret activities had just been exposed to the very people most capable of investigating them thoroughly. "I should probably collect it immediately," she said, starting to rise from her chair. I'm sure it can wait until morning, Charles replied calmly.
Unless there's something urgent you need to attend to?
The question hung in the air between them. Camilla sat back down slowly, recognizing that the game had changed fundamentally. The careful distance she had been maintaining for months had suddenly become a chasm that neither of them could easily cross. They finished dinner in near silence, each lost in their own thoughts about how the evening's revelations would reshape their relationship. Charles found himself studying his wife's face, looking for signs of the deception that had apparently been present for months.
How had he missed it? How had someone he loved and trusted so completely managed to fool him so thoroughly?
Later that night, as they prepared for bed, Camilla finally spoke directly about the situation. Charles, if you've seen my messages, you need to understand that things are not what they appear to be. Then, perhaps you should explain what they actually are, he replied, his voice carefully neutral.
But Camilla couldn't meet his eyes. It's complicated. There are things happening that are beyond my control. What things? Who are these people you've been meeting with? What arrangement are they referring to?
The questions came faster than Camilla could answer them, and Charles could see her withdrawing further with each one.
Whatever she was involved in, she wasn't prepared to confess it completely.
I can't tell you everything, she finally admitted.
Not yet. But I need you to trust me. The irony of asking for trust while admitting to deception was not lost on either of them.
Charles felt years of careful emotional rebuilding crumbling around him. The trust she was asking for had already been shattered by her own actions. That night, they slept in the same bed but felt worlds apart. Charles lay awake replaying conversations, searching messages, and trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex and threatening with each new piece of information. Tomorrow would bring more revelations, more painful truths, and decisions that would determine whether their marriage could survive the weight of whatever conspiracy Camilla had become entangled in. But tonight, in the darkness of their bedroom, Charles could only listen to his wife's carefully controlled breathing and wonder how many more secrets she was keeping from him.
The morning brought no relief from the tension that had settled over Clarence's house like a heavy fog.
Charles woke before dawn, his mind immediately returning to the devastating discovery of the previous day. Beside him, Camilla pretended to sleep, but her breathing was too controlled, too careful.
She was as awake and troubled as he was.
By 7 a.m., Charles had made his decision. He would meet with his most trusted advisors to understand the full scope of what they were facing. But first, he needed to retrieve Camilla's phone from security and examine the evidence more thoroughly. There might be details he had missed in his initial shock, information that could explain whether his wife was a willing participant in this conspiracy or a victim of it. The head of royal security met him in his private study, carrying a sealed evidence bag containing Camilla's phone. Your Majesty, our technical team has completed their preliminary analysis. The device contains communications that are concerning from a security perspective.
Elaborate. There are encrypted messaging applications that we haven't been able to fully penetrate yet.
However, the standard text messages reveal coordination with several individuals who appear to be planning some sort of media event or public announcement. The timing references suggest it's intended to coincide with your upcoming state visit to Australia. Charles felt his heart sink. His first major international tour as king was supposed to be a celebration of the Commonwealth relationship. If Camilla's conspiracy was timed to coincide with that visit, the damage to the monarchy could be irreparable.
What else?
There are financial records indicating large sums of money have been moved to offshore accounts over the past 6 months. The transactions are legal but unusual for a member of the royal family.
Additionally, we found evidence of communications with several journalists from major British newspapers.
The security chief paused, clearly uncomfortable with what he was about to reveal. Go on, Charles urged.
There are audio files, Your Majesty.
Recordings of private conversations.
Some appear to be between you and the Queen Consort. Others involve discussions with your sons, Prince William and Prince Harry.
Charles felt the blood drain from his face. His most private moments, his vulnerable conversations with his children, his intimate discussions with his wife, all secretly recorded and prepared for public consumption. The betrayal was more complete and devastating than he had imagined.
How many recordings?
We're still cataloging them, but preliminary count suggests dozens of files spanning several months. Charles dismissed his security chief and sat alone in his study, staring at the evidence bag containing his wife's phone. Inside that small device was enough material to destroy not just his marriage, but potentially his entire reign as king. The recordings could be edited, taken out of context, and weaponized against him in ways that would make his previous scandals seem trivial. A soft knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Camilla entered without waiting for permission, her face pale but determined. "We need to talk," she said simply. "Yes, we do." Charles gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Perhaps you can start by explaining these." He slid several printed screenshots of her messages across the desk. Camilla glanced at them briefly before meeting his eyes directly for the first time in days. "They're not what you think they are." "Then, tell me what they are." Camilla sat silently for a long moment, seeming to gather her courage. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been being blackmailed, Charles." The words hung in the air between them. Charles felt his anger begin to mix with confusion and concern. "Blackmailed? By whom? About what?" "It started 6 months ago. Someone contacted me with photographs, old photographs from before our marriage. Pictures that could be damaging if they became public." "What kind of photographs?" Camilla's composure finally cracked. Tears began streaming down her face as she struggled to continue. "From when I was much younger. Before I met you. I made some poor choices, trusted the wrong people. There are images that would humiliate not just me, but you and the entire royal family." Charles felt his worldview shifting again. If Camilla was telling the truth, then everything he had read on her phone took on a completely different meaning. She wasn't betraying him, she was trying to protect him. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me for help?" "Because I was ashamed. And because they made it clear that if I involved anyone else, especially you, they would release everything immediately. They wanted me to gather information, record conversations, provide them with insider access to royal activities. The recordings were part of their demands. They wanted proof of private conversations, evidence that could be used to embarrass or damage the monarchy. I've been trying to give them as little as possible while appearing to cooperate." Charles studied his wife's face, searching for signs of deception. The pain in her eyes seemed genuine, but he had been fooled before. "Who are they? What do they ultimately want?" "Money, initially. But it's evolved beyond that. They want to destabilize the monarchy itself. The people I've been meeting with represent interests that would benefit from a constitutional crisis." "What interests?" "Foreign governments, media empires, political groups that oppose the monarchy. They've formed a consortium of sorts, pooling resources to create maximum damage." The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Charles realized he wasn't just dealing with personal betrayal, but with an organized attack on the institution of the monarchy itself. "The offshore accounts? Money they paid me for information. I haven't touched it, it's all documented and ready to be returned. I hoped that if I appeared to be cooperating, I could gather enough evidence to expose them." Charles wanted to believe her. The alternative explanation for her behavior made more sense than willing betrayal. But years of royal training made him cautious about accepting any story at face value. "Show me everything," he demanded. "If you want me to trust you, I need to see all the evidence you've been gathering." Over the next 2 hours, Camilla revealed the full scope of the operation targeting their family. She had been documenting her blackmailers' demands, secretly recording her meetings with them, and building a case that could potentially bring down an international conspiracy to damage the British monarchy. The evidence was substantial. Hidden cameras had recorded her meetings, revealing faces and voices of the key players. Financial documents showed money trails leading back to foreign intelligence services and radical political organizations. Email chains demonstrated coordination between media outlets and hostile governments. "Why the secrecy from me?" Charles asked after reviewing everything. "Because they have people everywhere. Royal staff, government officials, even some of your closest advisors. They knew things about your schedule, your private conversations, your health information that could only come from inside sources." The revelation that their inner circle had been compromised was almost as shocking as the blackmail itself. Charles began mentally reviewing recent conversations, wondering which of his trusted advisors might be feeding information to his enemies. "What do they want you to do next?" "They want me to record a private conversation between you and Prince William about succession planning." Something they can edit to make it appear that you're concerned about William's fitness to be king. Charles felt sick. Such a recording, even if fabricated through selective editing, could create a constitutional crisis and damage his relationship with his son permanently.
And if you refuse? They'll release everything. The old photographs, doctored recordings of our conversations, financial documents that they'll claim show corruption in our household.
Even if we could eventually prove some of it was fabricated, the damage to the monarchy would be done. Charles stood and walked to the window, staring out at the London streets where normal people were going about their daily lives, unaware that the stability of their constitutional system was under attack.
What do you recommend we do? I think we should go on the offensive. Use the evidence I've gathered to expose them before they can execute their plan.
But it's risky. Once we make that move, they'll release whatever damaging material they have immediately.
And if we continue to cooperate with their demands?
It will never end.
They'll keep escalating until they have enough material to destroy us completely.
This isn't about money or temporary embarrassment, they want to end the monarchy entirely. Charles turned back to face his wife. Despite everything, despite the secrets and the deception, he could see that she had been trying to protect him in the only way she could. But the situation had spiraled beyond what either of them could handle alone. "We need help," he said finally.
"Who can we trust?"
It was the crucial question. If their inner circle had been compromised, if even royal staff might be feeding information to their enemies, then they needed to carefully choose their allies. "William," Charles said after a moment.
"Whatever else is happening, I trust my son completely." "What about the Prime Minister?"
"Possibly. But we need to be careful about how much we reveal and to whom." Charles spent the rest of the day developing a strategy. They would need to move quickly but carefully, exposing the conspiracy while minimizing the damage that could be done by whatever materials the blackmailers possessed. It would require perfect timing and absolute trust between him and Camilla. That evening, as they sat together reviewing their plans, Charles felt a complex mixture of emotions. Relief that Camilla hadn't willingly betrayed him, anger at the forces trying to destroy his family, and determination to protect the monarchy that had been entrusted to his care. "I'm sorry," Camilla said quietly as they prepared to retire for the evening.
"I'm sorry I couldn't trust you enough to tell you the truth from the beginning. I understand why you felt you couldn't.
But we face this together from now on.
No more secrets."
"No more secrets," she agreed. But even as they made this promise to each other, Charles knew that the most dangerous phase of their ordeal was just beginning. Tomorrow, they would begin the delicate process of turning the tables on their blackmailers. The success or failure of that effort would determine not just the future of their marriage, but the survival of the monarchy itself. The next morning brought an unexpected development that would test everything Charles and Camilla had planned. At 8 a.m., Charles received an urgent call from his private secretary.
"Your Majesty, we have a situation.
Someone has leaked information to the press about the Queen Consort's activities. The Sun is preparing to run a story tomorrow about secret meetings and financial irregularities." Charles felt his blood run cold. Their enemies had decided to accelerate their timeline, probably sensing that their operation had been discovered.
"What exactly do they claim to know?"
"According to our media contacts, they have photographs of the Queen Consort meeting with unidentified individuals, financial records suggesting money moving through offshore accounts, and claims from unnamed sources about suspicious behavior."
"Do they have recordings?"
"Not that we're aware of, but the day is young." Charles immediately contacted William, asking him to come to Clarence House for an urgent family meeting. He also reached out to the Prime Minister's office, requesting a confidential discussion about matters of national security. When William arrived an hour later, Charles and Camilla sat him down in the private sitting room and revealed everything. William listened in growing shock and anger as they explained the blackmail scheme, the conspiracy to destabilize the monarchy, and the immediate threat posed by tomorrow's newspaper story.
"How do we fight this?"
William asked when they had finished.
"We go public first," Charles replied.
"We control the narrative by revealing the truth before they can publish their distorted version."
"That's incredibly risky."
"Even if we expose the conspiracy, some of the damage will stick.
People will remember the accusations even after they're disproven."
"The alternative is worse," Camilla said quietly. "If we let them frame the story, we'll spend years trying to recover from accusations we can never fully disprove."
William turned to his father. What do you need from me? I need you to contact trusted journalists, ones with proven track records of accurate royal reporting. We're going to offer them an exclusive on the real story, the blackmail scheme, the evidence we've gathered, everything. And the recordings they have of our private conversations? We acknowledge them but provide context. We explained that they were obtained through blackmail and that any particularly damaging excerpts have likely been doctored or taken completely out of context. The Prime Minister arrived at noon, accompanied only by his most trusted security advisor. Charles briefed him on the situation, focusing particularly on the foreign intelligence connections that Camilla had uncovered. This is a matter of national security, the PM confirmed after reviewing the evidence. We have resources that can help, but we need to coordinate carefully to avoid making the situation worse. What resources? Counterintelligence services that have been tracking some of these same actors in other operations. Financial investigators who can trace the money trails and prove foreign involvement. And media specialists who understand how to combat coordinated disinformation campaigns. Over the next 6 hours, a war room atmosphere developed at Clarence House. Government security experts worked alongside royal staff to develop a comprehensive response strategy. They would simultaneously expose the conspiracy through trusted media channels, provide evidence to law enforcement for potential criminal prosecution, and prepare defensive measures against whatever retaliation might come. At 6 p.m., Charles made one of the most difficult decisions of his reign. He authorized the release of a detailed statement that would be distributed to major news outlets, revealing the blackmail scheme and providing extensive documentation of the conspiracy against the monarchy. The statement was carefully crafted to be factual but sympathetic to Camilla's situation. The royal family has become aware of an organized conspiracy involving foreign actors and domestic collaborators to destabilize the British monarchy through blackmail, disinformation, and the exploitation of private family communications. The Queen Consort has been the target of this operation for the past 6 months, threatened with the release of private materials unless she provided the conspirators with access to confidential royal information. Rather than comply fully with these demands, the Queen Consort has been working to gather evidence of this conspiracy while minimizing the damage that could be done to the institution of the monarchy. The royal family is now cooperating with law enforcement and national security agencies to ensure that those responsible for this attack on British institutions are held accountable. The statement was accompanied by carefully selected evidence, financial documents showing foreign money funding the operation, recordings of meetings where the conspiracy was discussed openly, and expert analysis proving that some of the alleged royal recordings had been digitally manipulated. But Charles knew that releasing this information was only the beginning. The real battle would be fought in the media and in public opinion over the coming days and weeks. The first responses came within hours. Several major newspapers that had been preparing to publish damaging stories about Camilla suddenly found themselves in the position of having to report on a much larger story about foreign interference in British affairs. The Sun, which had been ready to run their exposé the next morning, instead found themselves scrambling to rewrite their story entirely. Rather than royal wife and secret scandal, their headline would now read Foreign plot against royal family exposed. But not all the coverage was favorable. Some outlets, particularly those that had been part of the original conspiracy, fought back with their own version of events. They portrayed Camilla as a willing participant who was only claiming victimhood now that she had been caught. They questioned the authenticity of the evidence the royal family had provided and suggested that the blackmail claims were a sophisticated cover story. The social media response was particularly brutal. Hashtags like #CamillaGate and #Royalese began trending within hours. Doctored images and fake audio clips proliferated faster than they could be debunked. The conspiracy supporters had clearly prepared for this eventuality and launched a coordinated disinformation campaign designed to muddy the waters and make it impossible for the public to distinguish truth from fiction. By evening, polls were already showing damage to the monarchy's approval ratings. Even though many people believed the royal family's account of events, the mere existence of the controversy was enough to shake public confidence. "We're losing the narrative war," William reported during an emergency family meeting that night. "The truth is complicated, but lies are simple and spread faster." "What do our media advisors recommend?" Charles asked. "They want you to do a televised interview. Something that humanizes the situation and allows people to see your genuine emotional response to what's happened." Charles had always been uncomfortable with deeply personal media appearances, but he recognized that extraordinary circumstances required extraordinary measures. "When?" "Tomorrow evening."
It would give us time to prepare properly and counter whatever new attacks they launch during the day. That night, Charles and Camilla worked with a team of media specialists to prepare for what would be one of the most important interviews of his reign. They practiced answering difficult questions, prepared responses to likely attacks, and developed ways to explain complex financial and intelligence matters in terms that ordinary viewers could understand. But the most challenging aspect was emotional preparation. Charles would need to discuss his feelings of betrayal, his concerns about his wife's safety, and his fears for the future of the monarchy, all while maintaining the dignity expected of a king. The key, the media advisor explained, is to be authentic without being vulnerable to attack.
Show emotion, but not weakness.
Express concern, but not panic. The next morning brought fresh challenges. Several newspapers published what they claimed were additional recordings of private royal conversations. Audio experts immediately identified them as sophisticated fakes, but the damage was done before the debunking could catch up. More disturbing was the revelation that hackers had attempted to breach multiple royal communication systems overnight. While the attacks had been unsuccessful, they demonstrated that the conspiracy had significant technical capabilities and was willing to escalate their operations. "They're getting desperate," the government security advisor explained. "Which makes them more dangerous. Desperate actors take bigger risks and cause more collateral damage." As the day of the interview approached, Charles found himself questioning everything.
Was he making the right choice in going public? Would his appearance help or hurt the situation? Could the monarchy survive this level of sustained attack?
But, when he looked at Camilla, still dealing with the trauma of months of blackmail and threats, he knew he had to try. She had protected him and the institution he represented as best she could under impossible circumstances. Now it was his turn to protect her and defend the truth.
The interview was scheduled for 8 p.m. on BBC One.
By late afternoon, advance excerpts were being released, generating additional media coverage and public discussion. The palace communications team monitored social media sentiment carefully, adjusting their strategy based on real-time public reaction. At 7:30, as Charles was finishing his final preparations, his private secretary approached with news that would change everything once again. "Your Majesty, we've just received word that one of the key figures in this conspiracy has agreed to cooperate with authorities. He's willing to testify about the foreign funding, the coordination with hostile intelligence services, and the technical methods used to create fake recordings." Charles felt a surge of hope. A credible witness from inside the conspiracy could provide the kind of evidence that would be impossible to dismiss or discredit.
What does he want in return?
Protection from the other conspirators and immunity from prosecution for his role in the scheme.
And the government is willing to make that deal?
They consider it a worthwhile trade.
His testimony could help break up an entire network of foreign operatives working against British interests.
As Charles walked toward the studio where the interview would take place, he felt cautiously optimistic for the first time in days. The truth was finally beginning to emerge, and, with it, the possibility that his marriage and his monarchy might survive this unprecedented attack. But he also knew that the most critical phase was just beginning. The interview would determine how the public understood and responded to everything that had happened. The future of his reign, his relationship with Camilla, and the stability of the monarchy itself would be decided in the next few hours. The television studio felt smaller than Charles had expected. Under the hot lights, facing veteran journalist Emily Maitlis, he was acutely aware that millions of people across the Commonwealth would be watching this conversation. Everything he said would be analyzed, dissected, and debated for years to come. "Your Majesty, thank you for agreeing to this interview during what must be an extremely difficult time for your family," Maitlis began. "Thank you for the opportunity to speak directly to the people about these very serious matters," Charles replied, his voice steady despite the gravity of the situation.
"Let's start with the basic facts.
You're alleging that your wife, Queen Consort Camilla, has been the victim of an international blackmail scheme.
Some people will find that difficult to believe."
Charles had prepared for this skeptical tone.
"I understand why people might be doubtful.
The scope and sophistication of this operation is truly shocking. But the evidence is overwhelming, and I hope that as more details emerge, people will see that this was an organized attack on our democratic institutions, not just on my family."
"What convinced you that your wife was a victim rather than a willing participant?"
"The evidence she had been secretly gathering for months.
Hidden recordings of her meetings with the blackmailers. Documentation of their demands.
Financial records showing that she never spent any of the money they paid her, money that she was forced to accept to maintain her cover while building a case against them.
Mateless leaned forward.
But, those private recordings of your conversations, some very personal exchanges with your sons, how do you explain those?
Charles took a deep breath.
This was the most difficult part to explain publicly.
Camilla was forced to make those recordings under threat.
The blackmailers had compromising material from her past, and they threatened to destroy not just her reputation, but to damage the monarchy itself if she didn't comply with their demands. She tried to give them as little as possible while appearing to cooperate.
What kind of compromising material?
Without going into inappropriate detail, there were photographs from many years ago, before our marriage, that would have been deeply embarrassing to her and damaging to the royal family if made public.
And you believe these blackmailers had connections to foreign governments?
The evidence clearly shows funding from foreign intelligence services and coordination with hostile actors who have a vested interest in destabilizing British institutions. This wasn't a simple extortion scheme, it was an attack on our constitutional monarchy. Mateless shifted to her most challenging question. Your Majesty, some people are saying that even if your wife was initially a victim, her actions over these past months constitute a betrayal of your marriage and your trust.
How do you respond to that?
Charles felt the weight of the question. His answer would determine not just how the public viewed Camilla, but how they understood the nature of leadership during crisis. My wife was faced with an impossible choice. She could have come to me immediately when the blackmail began, but that would have meant the immediate release of damaging material that could have seriously harmed the monarchy during the crucial early months of my reign. Instead, she chose to protect the institution by putting herself at personal risk to gather evidence against our attackers. He paused, allowing emotion to enter his voice for the first time.
Was I hurt to discover that she had kept this from me?
Of course. But, when I understood what she was facing and what she was trying to protect, I realized that her actions came from love and loyalty, not betrayal. She was protecting something larger than our marriage, she was protecting the stability of our constitutional system.
What happens now?
Now we work with law enforcement and intelligence services to ensure that everyone involved in this conspiracy is held accountable. We've provided extensive evidence to authorities, and I'm confident that justice will be served.
And your marriage?
Charles smiled slightly for the first time during the interview. My marriage has survived many challenges over the years.
It will survive this one too.
If anything, working together to expose this conspiracy has reminded us both of what we're fighting for and why our partnership matters. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering technical details about the evidence, the timeline of events, and the government's response to foreign interference. But Charles knew that the crucial moments had been his explanation of Camilla's motivations and his public affirmation of his trust in her. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, social media sentiment began shifting. The hashtags that had been trending negatively were being overwhelmed by messages of support. Hashtag Stand with Camilla and hashtag Protect the Monarchy began dominating the conversation. More importantly, the insider who had agreed to cooperate with authorities held a press conference the next morning that provided devastating testimony about the scope of the conspiracy. Dr. Marcus Webb, a former government communications specialist, revealed that he had been recruited by foreign intelligence operatives to coordinate a long-term campaign to damage the British monarchy. The goal was never just to embarrass individual royals, Webb testified. It was to create enough scandals and controversies to turn public opinion against the entire institution of monarchy. The ultimate objective was to contribute to a constitutional crisis that would allow hostile foreign powers to exploit British political instability. Webb's testimony included detailed information about funding sources, technical methods used to create fake recordings, and the involvement of several prominent media figures who had been unknowingly manipulated into amplifying the conspiracy's message. Within 48 hours of Charles's interview, public opinion had shifted dramatically. Polling showed increased support for both the king and queen consort, and approval ratings for the monarchy actually improved as people rallied around the royal family in response to foreign attack. But the personal cost had been enormous. Charles and Camilla spent weeks rebuilding trust in their relationship, working through the emotional trauma of the blackmail period and the discovery process that had nearly destroyed their marriage. I should have trusted you from the beginning, Charles told Camilla during one of their long evening conversations. I should have known that you would never willingly betray our family. And I should have trusted that together we could face anything, Camilla replied. My mistake was thinking I had to protect you by handling this alone. The legal proceedings continued for months.
Several foreign intelligence operatives were declared persona non grata and expelled from the country. Domestic collaborators faced charges ranging from blackmail to violations of the Official Secrets Act.
Financial investigations recovered millions of pounds that had been funneled through offshore accounts. Perhaps most importantly, the experience led to significant improvements in royal family security protocols. New systems were implemented to detect and prevent future blackmail attempts, communication security was upgraded, and staff vetting procedures were strengthened. 6 months after the crisis began, Charles and Camilla undertook their postponed state visit to Australia. The trip, originally intended to strengthen Commonwealth relationships, became a powerful demonstration of the monarchy's resilience and the public's continued support for the institution. Standing together on the steps of Parliament House in Canberra, Charles reflected on how much had changed since that morning when he had first discovered Camilla's phone. The crisis that had nearly destroyed their marriage had ultimately strengthened it. The attack that was meant to destabilize the monarchy had instead revealed the depth of public support for the institution. "We're stronger than they thought we were," Camilla said quietly as they waved to the crowds that had gathered to welcome them. "We're stronger than I thought we were," Charles replied. The scandal that had dominated headlines for weeks gradually faded from public attention, replaced by stories about the royal couple's successful diplomatic efforts and their renewed popularity with the British people. But the lessons of those difficult months remained. Charles had learned that even in marriage, trust required constant nurturing and open communication. Camilla had learned that protecting someone sometimes meant trusting them enough to share the burden rather than carrying it alone. Most importantly, they had both learned that their relationship was strong enough to survive not just external attacks, but the internal doubts and fears that those attacks had created. Years later, when historians examined this period of Charles's reign, they would note it as a turning point. The monarchy had faced its most sophisticated modern challenge and emerged stronger. The king and queen consort had weathered a crisis that would have destroyed lesser partnerships. But, for Charles and Camilla themselves, the significance was more personal. They had discovered that their love could survive doubt, that their partnership could withstand deception, and that their commitment to each other and to the institution they served was unbreakable. The phone that had nearly ended their marriage became instead the instrument of its ultimate strengthening. In discovering Camilla's secrets, Charles had also discovered the depth of her devotion. In sharing her burden, Camilla had learned the power of complete trust. Their marriage had been tested by forces that few couples ever face, and it had not only survived but emerged more honest, more open, and more resilient than ever before. On quiet evenings at Clarence House, when the day's official duties were complete and they could simply be husband and wife rather than king and queen consort, Charles and Camilla would sometimes reflect on those terrifying weeks when their future together had seemed so uncertain. "Do you think we would have made it through without the crisis?" Camilla asked one evening. "I think we would have survived," Charles replied thoughtfully. "But I'm not sure we would have thrived the way we do now. Sometimes the worst challenges reveal the best in us." Looking back, they both agreed that the discovery of that phone, the moment that had seemed like the end of everything, had actually been the beginning of something better. A marriage built not just on love and compatibility, but on tested trust and proven resilience. The conspiracy against them had failed in every possible way. Instead of destroying the monarchy, it had strengthened it. Instead of dividing the royal family, it had united them. Instead of ending their marriage, it had perfected it. In the end, Charles and Camilla's love story became not just a tale of romance overcoming obstacles, but a demonstration that truth, courage, and commitment could triumph over even the most sophisticated attempts at deception and destruction. Their marriage had survived the ultimate test, and they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, with complete honesty and absolute trust.